Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Earth Day Everyday podcast, where we aim to spotlight exemplary activists, policymakers, and changemakers in the field of sustainability and climate change. I'm your host, Aryan Doshi, and today we are extremely lucky to be joined by Sydney. Sydney is the CEO of Green Revival, an organization working to give our planet a fighting chance by solving the invasive plant species crisis. Sydney, it is absolutely wonderful to have you with us today.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for taking the time. But we have so much to unpack in this podcast, and maybe if I can just open up by talking about the wildfires in my home state of California, right? The amount of destruction they've caused in LA, and I think in the history of LA, I don't think we've seen wildfires as destructive as this, right? And you see Palisades, Altadena, Eden Bay, many of these wildfires are yet to be contained, and we see, wildfires causing so much destruction to people's livelihood. And so maybe, just first question is, are such crises preventable, especially in a state like California, and what can we do to take more preventive actions against them?
Yeah, it's actually just so simple. Like the science is, there's tons of people that follow the science and work in fire management, wildfire management fields. And when there's a big crisis, people love to scapegoat and blame. And so a lot of misinformation goes around. But
For sure.
usually at the most important things, you're going to have a wide spectrum of good and bad reasons, true and not
Absolutely.
true. Um, But a fire has ingredients, like it's an equation, it's math. Like
Yeah,
fire has fuel, oxygen, and sparks of heat. Oxygen is something we need to live, so we can't really control. If, as long as we're breathing, there's going to be oxygen for us to breathe.
for sure.
Um, wind patterns change, but we don't control the wind.
Yeah.
Um, and then in terms of the spark of heat, I think almost half of the wildfires recently
Yeah.
um, are in California are from arsonists, are from sometimes homeless
Yeah.
people, really anyone that is spending time by
Wow.
where wildfire would become, a fire would become wild.
Yeah.
Many people smoke and create, a flame, light a
For
candle,
sure. Yeah.
but where you have a lot of fuel is really what we can control. So the Maui wildfires were started from invasive grasses, and Hawaii has a really big issue with, because it's an island, there's a lot of new species that come on from birds and trade with the rest of the world. And so it's been, and this is a scientific term, so it's been colonized by plants. There's a lot of plant colonizations going on, or in another word, is infestation. So the Maui wildfires were preventable by invasive plants. And so, but in California, on the coast of California, so historically, many forest fires in California, but this one was an urban fire. So,
Yeah.
right, this is where humans have a lot more impact on what's around them because we do landscaping, we have parks nearby, and whatever's closer to the city has more funding and has more management. And so a lot of people are talking about mismanagement. I like to say stewardship because I think
Yeah.
that word has gotten some stink. Um, there's too much misinformation around the word management for some reason. So I will not use that word. But in terms of stewardship, we take plants out of the ground, farmers have to weed, and they also have to put stuff in the ground. And so it's a case of what do we have to take out and what do we have to put in. And the biggest thing right now with invasive plants is that we're not getting rid of it as fast as it's growing.
Yeah.
Sometimes we're not even getting rid of it. And so they start wildfires, many extinctions, biodiversity collapse.
Sure.
In some places, there's certain species, elevated ticks disease, elevated allergies, water contamination. I could go on and on. If something's not supposed to be where it is, bad symptoms are going to come up. The earth is a body. And so if you have a disease or an infestation, right, a virus colonizes our
For
cells. So
sure.
it's
Yeah.
the same thing. Um, yeah, so we have to figure out what to do with it. We need to remove it and we need to have incentives to get rid of it.
For sure. And I think on that note of incentives you bring right there, right? for all the critics who maybe look at, what's left behind this biomass, they're like, where does this biomass go, right? I mean, we don't want to just put it in the landfills where it can end up in being incinerated, right? How do we sort of take, that debris and turn it into something meaningful? And so can you maybe talk about that invasive plants that are happening? How can we sort of reintegrate them in some shape or form, back into our society?
If you just open your eyes, the plants are everywhere. Everything around us, like our clothes, if it's made of cotton,
Yeah.
our homes, right? We live in trees. We're just like, nesting animals. We're just like owls. I went to school with the mascot of owls, so I'm really into owls. But if you just look around, everything is could be made out of plants. Maybe my earrings aren't made of plants, but some earrings have flowers and you can do something with that. So anything could be made and you could have more community action and make art. Some work that we're doing with Green Revival that's, you know, contracts signed are about a hydrogen project,
Yeah.
making hydrogen for EV charging,
Mhm.
a construction materials project,
Yeah.
and a biochar project. So big supply chains for agriculture, energy, and materials to build things. But there's a lot of possibility if people want to get involved.
For sure.
It's not always going to be from an industry or a big business. So
Yeah,
there's a lot of art projects
for
and
sure.
things that you can make out of an invasive plant. But sometimes it's like not every time can someone just go and take an invasive plant. You have
Yeah.
to think out the purpose. And so that's what my business does. Not everybody can just go and do it.
Yeah.
Um, but I'm building the incentive structures to use plants. My degree's in ecology and I like networking.
Yeah. No, I think that's amazing, right? We always have to find, incentives for people to be on board with this, right? Because if they have no motivation, they're not going to want to see how this biomass can be circulated. And maybe on that note, more of a fun question is, do you maybe have like a particular, product that's been transformed from an invasive plant species and you see the application of it in real life? Do you maybe have a favorite of what you've seen in terms of what it used to be from that biomass and what it's become?
Yeah, this is like so simple, but I like it because it's simple and easy and it's not overcomplicated over and
Yeah,
out
for
because
sure.
it also represents that. And so that's probably why I like it so much.
Yeah.
There are very pretty grasses that people use instead of having flowers, they also have phragmites and it's more like boho style, but if you're decorating an apartment or a dorm room,
Yeah, yeah.
live somewhere, it's a really good decoration and I really like it.
No, that's amazing, right? I think the sheer variety of products we can get from biomass has been incredible. And I think recently there's also been a lot of attention on how can we maybe take this biomass, this debris that's the fuel for wildfires, and can we maybe, transform it into, sustainable form of energy? Do you think
Yeah,
that has any sort of, viable potential in society? Is it too expensive?
definitely, especially in California. That's yeah, it's the way
One
to
of
do
the
it. Yeah.
And is it like cost effective or is it just not easy for the consumers to access?
Some cases it works and some it doesn't. Everything in natural resources and climate, if you're really taking care of the land, the default answer is it depends
Yeah.
because sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't because there's going to be a negative impact that is probably not worth the work or there's a even higher purpose for the plant. Maybe medicinal uses, but
Yeah.
plants can have so many, like even every piece of the plant can have different things.
Yeah, no, I think plants, play a crucial role in how ecosystems, function today. And I know one of your other main focuses of research that you had done is, on bees as well, and their focus in ecosystems and, how they pollinate and disperse pollen from distributor to recipient, right? They sort of display the circular economy, in their own system, right? So can you maybe talk about, about bees and the way they act as keystone species in their ecosystems, their importance, their reliance?
Sure. I'll talk about it from a plant perspective.
Yeah.
Um, Plants have a lot of symbioses. I don't even know if I said that word right, but it's funny. Um, there there are lots of relationships that plants have with other living things that aren't plants.
Yeah.
Humans rely on plants, and bees, as a keystone species, are spreading plants.
Yeah.
And without the bees, we also don't have the plants. They look so different, but they're very directly related. If
Yeah.
you have no plants growing, then you also don't have bees and pollinators.
Yeah.
And there's many other insects that have the same purpose in an ecosystem or a similar niche
Yeah.
in ecosystem where they rely on plants.
I think for sure, right? I mean, one of my favorite sort of sayings is if we as humans could, emulate what bees are doing in their own respective ecosystems, right? The way they collaborate with one another, to make, those jars of honey, then we could make our society a better place as well, right? That's something I always like to think about.
And
And
buzz around like the bees.
yeah,
The
exactly.
bees.
Exactly. Yeah. But can you also maybe just talk a little bit about when it comes to incentive, right? When it comes to wanting to take meaningful action and transform this biomass into something that we can work with, a lot of people have this mindset that just such a small tiny action, right, it isn't going to create substantial change, right? And so is that maybe a mindset that you've encountered, that as one person we're not going to be able to have that sort of meaningful impact, and so why bother? Have you ever faced maybe any critics who've maybe had that mindset, and how do you go about dealing with it? Because I think whatever problem you're trying to tackle in sustainability, you always face that sort of critique of someone saying, you as one person, how are you going to make that difference that we need? So why bother? Why try?
Wow, you ask really good questions. I would say if you have that mindset at any level of impact, or you could be leading a company, you could be leading the government, you could be leading a family, you could just be in charge of
For
something really
sure,
big.
yeah.
And if you don't think what you're doing has impact, then why, like, maybe you don't see how it does, or you're doing the wrong thing. But when you know that something is having a positive impact, there's like 10 dozens, sometimes hundreds of messages saying like, yeah,
For sure.
obviously this is the right thing to do.
Yeah.
But in like, and also in a more physical sense, like, or in a more natural perspective,
Yeah.
like grassroots, the word grassroots,
Yeah.
literally if you take one piece out of the ground, you're changing the entire world. Like you take the roots of one plant out,
Yeah.
that plant could have,
It's
you know,
like pulling someone's hair out. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, and it's so simple, but it's actually for an organism that's so tiny, it's their whole world.
Potential impact.
It could be, not every time, but so understanding plants can help you understand your impact.
Yeah, for sure. And I think you use the analogy of plants, right? I also like to use this analogy of bees, right?
Yeah.
One bee in its entire lifetime can only make 1/12 of a teaspoon of honey, right? And yet, that's like a fraction of what you see, right, oozing out of bottles onto tea and pancakes, what you see lined up at the supermarkets, these aisles and aisles of jars of honey, right? So I think it's also about acknowledging the fact that maybe you as one person might only have 1/12 of a teaspoon of honey as your impact, but it's only right if we work together, if we rally around one another, we can take that 1/12 of a teaspoon of honey and make it into a jar of honey, right? Or in your case, make it into, a better form of grass. So I think there's always something to be said about, those sorts of analogies. Maybe I think another aspect that you always want to focus on is policy, right? And I think especially in the United States, it's been hard to see sustainable policy come to fruition. And that in many ways hinders what we're able to do, right? Whether it's finding meaningful outputs for this biomass or any sort of outcome you're trying to achieve, right? That's always hard when you don't have good policy. And so is there anything that you think we can do maybe on a more local level, or even have you seen countries like maybe the EU doing something well from a policy level that we in the United States should replicate?
Hmm. Well, I think we can there the way I like to look at it is if people are already organizing around something, they're trying to fix that problem and they might just be doing it in the wrong way, or they need to add something else into the recipe for them to
Yeah.
finally actually get that thing done. Because I think a lot of climate activists have been drilling the same, like in some ways they're insane. Like they're just doing the same thing over and over again,
Yeah. Yeah.
and they know that it's not working. So like
Yeah.
for example, in fossil fuel activism, no matter what event they've done, it hasn't changed any graphs. Nothing. They've done nothing.
Wow.
They're wasting their time.
Mm.
Um, and if they actually want to phase something out, you have to replace it by phasing something up.
For sure.
And who knows how long that can take, but by saying it has to be and having demands and it has to be this,
Yeah.
um, I think my recommendation for other people making recommendations is not to advocate for something that you know doesn't work and
Yeah.
look for alternatives. It's bio-based alternatives. So figuring out what works, what doesn't, building up the supply chain so that eventually when the technology can flip a switch.
Flip a switch. Yeah.
I was like swipping a flick.
Yeah. Yeah.
Flip a switch. When the technology can flip a switch, like just like, igniting a fire or like, just turning a light on and off, like we kind of take it for granted,
For
but
sure.
it's literally in a way it's a fire. I mean, it's just lit. It's fires give off light. It's very similar, but doesn't have a few things in common. Um, yeah, so there's a lot of people that could talk more about very specific
Yeah.
solutions in energy and and this is actually bipartisan, left or right. Everybody talks about in climate,
Yeah.
letting the market figure it out, the carbon markets.
For sure. Yeah.
Um, and it's actually funny because I was in a Canadian conference, which
Yeah.
is more left-leaning than America, and many Canadians were like, I'm not Trumpian, but I have this Trump idea. But the Trump idea was like replace, that we should let the market decide because there's so many solutions. It's
For
really
sure.
awesome. Like the DOE decided that their policy was everything, everywhere, all at once.
For sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Fund everything because they had a ton of money.
Yeah.
And so now we're figuring out after we just threw all that money, where is it sticking? And so that's something both sides are looking at.
Yeah, I think for sure. I think we are going on a positive trajectory, right? We saw the IRA Inflation Reduction Act and the impact that had when it comes to funding for
Yeah.
sustainable projects in the United States. But maybe just, a couple more questions, right? When it comes to invasive species, I think the first thing people think about is also biodiversity, right? And the loss of life that comes with that. How these plants, right? They're introduced into these ecosystems and they harm native species, right? And that can alter ecosystems, trophic levels from a top-down basis. And so can you maybe talk about that effect? Because I think a lot of people from the outside don't see it as consequential when in reality it impacts humans as well because we're also a part of the food chain.
Yeah, I mean, it's a chain, like you said, it's a food chain. So everything is connected, everything feeds the next. And if, right, a chain is circular, so if you break one part of the chain, then the
Everything
crops
collapses.
aren't
Yeah.
going to work. Um, yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that's great, right? I think the potential for biomass, in society is there, right? And I think the work that Greening Revival has done has been so amazing. And maybe just on that note, right? Something I always like to talk about at the end of my podcast is like, do you have any advice for, aspiring environmentalists as well, right? Someone who maybe doesn't know their way in the field is trying to enter it but just doesn't know, what path to pursue, how do they become more involved, what organizations do they join, right? There's just so many opportunities out there, but it can be hard to start. And so do you have maybe any sort of guidance and wisdom so that maybe one day they can also create an organization like Green Revival and make that positive impact like you're doing?
Well, are you asking for a friend or for you?
Just in general, like anyone who's watching, right? How can they
Yeah.
make a positive impact like you've been able to do?
Yeah. I would say when people want to make positive impact, right? The world, this is written in my indigenous culture, right? Chains go back.
Yeah,
I'm indigenous to Israel.
yeah,
And so the chains, what was I talking about? Yes, so the world is works because of three things: peace, justice, and truth. I
yeah,
think people are focused on peace and justice when they don't know what the truth is. So they're advocating for the wrong things. They want peace, they want justice, but they don't actually know what that is without truth. And so
yeah.
when I was able to see the truth when it comes to the world of invasive plants, the world of plants, the world
For
of
sure. Yeah,
then I knew what needed to be done, and I knew that there were things that I did that actually would make me a good person to do it. And it was kind of just like, okay, I'll do it because I don't know anybody else that like I had a conservation job in New York and I was underwater reading. I was scuba diving and
yeah,
pulling the plants out of this lake where somebody had died from swimming. I know every time I mention that story, they're listening. Um, but and all these other impacts, like
yeah,
aesthetics and tourism.
yeah,
And so well, I worked in it. I studied climate science, worked with plants. I led outdoor trips. So it
yeah,
just makes sense. Like that's the truth. Like I that's my role on the earth. Okay, found it.
yeah,
You don't know what the truth is, and you're just gonna run around screaming, no justice, no
yeah.
peace,
But you don't
when
know
you're
exactly.
actually
Yeah,
advocating for the opposite of what you think you're advocating for sometimes. And being in
yeah.
DC, there's a lot of activists that are trying to do good, but they are so far from the truth.
It
Uh,
distorts what their
yeah,
vision. Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, no, I think that's wonderful advice, right? For everybody watching, right? I mean, you sort of just have to find your place on this planet and find and seek the truth that you think will do good in this world, right? Like you said.
yeah.
So thank you so much for Sydney for taking the time to be here on the podcast. Thank you so much to our viewers for joining us on a Tuesday evening. And we'll see you all on the next episode of Earth Day Every Day. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thanks.